Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon,
Find
Sean.
her. How you doing, Jalal?
Not too bad. We're missing Amy today.
Yeah, she got engaged in some unexpected child rearing. It happens.
Oh.
How you doing today?
Not too bad, man. How's it going? What are we talking about today?
Well, we know that the RSP deadline at time of recording is well in the rearview mirror.
That's right.
Do you find it a big deal?
Not for me.
Not for
really.
me either.
No.
I mean, I think it's like a rite of spring. now.
RSP
Everyone-
is meh.
people know they got to contribute to RSPs. And
Yeah, exactly. Plus, I think you can always contribute. It's just, the deadline was for last year, but it's always a good idea to keep contributing.
Well, one thing that RSPs have an impact on is your tax, and that's
Right.
something I thought we'd talk about today. I think we can give a shout out to the typical life of the party, the
Yeah.
accountants in our lives.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
talk about, for those of you that don't have one, why you might want to consider having one, and that's going to come up after these messages.
Sounds cool. Looking forward to it. Coming up next, guys.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sean Durkin here with Jalal Madani.
Welcome,
Today
Sean.
we're going to talk about accountants and why one should use one if you're not already. And
For sure.
why we came up with this topic was I was talking with a friend of mine the other day.
Yeah.
And a very successful woman. She's I knew her from university actually, and she's a doctor, but a salaried doctor, high salary doctor. She works out of Ottawa, and anyways, we're chatting, and she's like, yeah, it's tax time, and I've got to sit down and start working through my tax. I said,
Yeah.
that's no problem. Just go to your accountant. She goes, why don't you use one?
She said she doesn't use an accountant. High
Yeah.
salary doctor doesn't use an accountant.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like she's basically mid six figures in terms of salary and pension and all that stuff.
Right.
And, she doesn't use an accountant. And I was
Yeah.
like, I was kind of like, what?
Yeah. That's cool.
So I thought we'd talk about, why would one want to use an accountant if you're not already using one?
And if your reason is because I don't know how to vet a nice accountant, I think today's episode will cover that, right? Like how to vet one out, what kind of qualities to look for in an accountant.
Yep.
That would obviously help you make a more of an informed decision on which accountant to hire. So let's get into that, Sean.
Yeah. So let's first start off by, let's get the big elephant in the room.
All right, let's hear. What's the big elephant in the room?
Accountants
Yeah.
are not the most exciting people in the world.
No, they're
They're
not.
just not, for the most part.
That's right. Yeah.
I might argue you don't really want an exciting accountant in your life, but I
Yeah.
digress for that for a moment.
Yeah. And they
gotta-
don't even admit that, by the way.
Well, it's not their fault either. I mean, for any of those out there who's listening, who's ever taken an accounting course or many accounting courses, as you have and I have,
Yeah.
it really is some dry, mundane stuff.
Very dry. Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
and a lot of technicality to it and so forth.
Yeah.
And to actually go through all the machinations to become a chartered public accountant or
Yeah.
a certified public accountant,
Yeah.
or chartered accountant. It takes an enormous amount of work. You need to accomplish it successfully. It takes years to become an accountant, but it's important work you're doing because what you're trying to do is navigate, whether on the personal side, taxation and working with the Canada Revenue Agency,
Yeah.
or if you're running a business, managerial accounting, which is basically articulating your profit structure
Yeah.
so that you can understand where your costs are being, driven by, or
Right.
what your costs are being driven by, and where your profits are actually being extracted from.
Right. Like any cash flow and stuff like that would obviously be under some kind of purview of the accountant or whatnot.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wanted to cover off kind of three things as to why you might want an account. Now, if you, depending on where you are in life, you're making some form of salary. And so
Yeah.
that makes your time valuable. And I'm not directing this at people making $1 million a year or $500,000 a year. I direct this to anyone making any kind of money.
Yeah.
Because if you spend your time doing one thing, it means you can't spend your time doing another thing.
Yeah.
So, time is money. And if you're not very good at doing taxes, if you're not very good at managing your the accounting aspect of your life,
Mm-hmm.
you probably want to allocate value to an accountant so you can spend time doing that of what you're good at. Get better at something you're really good at,
Yeah.
and let someone who's expert in the area of taxation
Yeah.
handle that.
Unless you're an accountant in which you can work on your own accounting.
Probably.
All right.
Although I don't know how many surgeons actually operate on themselves, but anyways,
Fair.
that could
Fair.
be. But good point, Joel.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing. There's definitely a time benefit, and I think the more money that you earn, the more important understanding the trade-off between spending time on something you're not really good at versus spending time sharpening the saw on something you're very good at.
Yeah.
becomes more and more beneficial. What about you? What do you think?
Well, I think the same thing. I think even as your income grows, your strategies that you might want to use in order to be as tax efficient as possible and to increase your chances of even further wealth growth, I think you would need an accountant for that. Even if you're the smartest guy in numbers, an accountant who's been doing it for a while would obviously know more strategies to take, more routes to take, even whether you have kids or whatnot. But I did want to highlight some things that I was thinking about, like for example, some things that I thought about when I was looking for an accountant back in the day. And I hope this becomes relevant to our listeners, where when you're trying to figure out what kind of accountant you want to hire or which accountant you want, I think these are some things. So the first thing is obviously credentials. You do want an accountant with the proper credentials. I think, as you said, CPA, I think now is chartered professional accountant, and then there's a certified public accountant, right?
Yeah.
So depending on the level of strategy or the level of difficulty of your financial or economic situation, will depend on which designation you want. The other thing that I think is quite important is finding an accountant that. Sorry, actually, before I go there, relevance.
Yeah.
So relevance, when you are looking for an accountant, you want to ask yourself, first of all, am I doing accounting just for personal or business?
Right.
If it's business, if you have a corporation, if it's business, then you want to ask yourself, are you just a sole proprietorship or a corporation?
Right.
Right? Because depending on that, the accountants for sole proprietorships or the accountants that only do sole proprietorships may not know. They probably studied a little bit in school, but they may not have the experience and I guess I don't want to call it the sophistication, but the depth of knowledge for a corporation, right? And then you go into even further, right? Like the individual needs to assess their situation. Do they have shareholder agreements? Because the accountant will want to see that. So choosing an accountant that has worked with corporations, for example, in this specific scenario, with shareholder agreements will prove more worthy to you, right? Do you have kids? You want an accountant that deals with families, because then you can take advantage of, I don't know, I don't have kids myself, but maybe certain benefits if, for children, like dental benefits or I don't know what.
Well, there's that. There's also, depending on, how old your children are and where you're at financially and in terms of the arc of your life,
right? You're
looking at intergenerational wealth transfer, right? And doing that tax efficiently. And a good account can be a real critical component of
setting all that
process.
stuff up. Yeah. And then ask yourself, like, trusts. Do you have trusts in place? Because not all accountants, by the way, I don't care if they went to the most prestigious university, not all accountants know how to deal with trusts and what to do with trusts from tax incentives and stuff. So the point is relevance, right? You want to find, just like in law, right? When you want to get a will done or when you need to hire a lawyer, you want a lawyer that's specialized in that specific field that you're looking.
Yep.
Try to find an accountant, in my opinion, that I don't want to say specializes in that, but has got a lot of experience in that, right? Like corporation versus personal, trust versus no trust.
It's not dissimilar to when you walk into a hospital. Okay, and you're going to see a lot of doctors walking around. I love that joke, by the way. We got to get this man to a hospital. What is it? A big white building with lots of doctors and nurses. That's important right now. But you're going to see a lot of doctors, and the reality is they all went to school for the same baseline level of education, which is your MD, as I understand it.
Yep.
But from there, some doctors tend to specialize in brain surgery or knee surgery or whatever, general practice and so forth. Accountants are no different than that. They have 100%. Different specializations, even though they have the same baseline training and education. Yeah. Some tend to specialize in different areas than another.
Yeah.
The one thing that I also look at when you're looking with an accountant is someone's going to sit down with you and really understand where you want to be 5, 10, 15 years down the road.
Right.
And try and bridge that gap, working with your other advisors like your wealth planners, your financial advisors, and so forth, to really orchestrate the path that you're going on as time goes on. Because if you choose your accountant properly, you hope that they're going to be with you for 10, 15, 20 years, 25 years, 30 years.
Yeah.
It's a whole generational thing.
Yeah. And you want to choose the right one, because the 20 years, and that accountant's probably going to know the ins and the outs of you and your family, because finance plays a huge role in everybody's family, obviously. And they're going to know, like, I was mentioning, I think to you yesterday, that my accountant was the only other person, right, that knew everything about my life, because, he had access to my money.
Yep.
He had access to my online accounts, and he had blank checks signed by me ready, to be deployed at any instance. So you want to make that right decision.
Yes.
Because that one accountant has got, unfortunately, there is, yes, fiduciary duty, but he's got your life in the palm of his hand to a certain extent.
That's right.
Right.
Yes. No, that's true. That's very true. But I mean, look, you get the right account. You can make the other thing too is that they can make an enormous difference in terms of understanding and knowing each and every avenue you have to avoid tax. And when I say avoid tax, I believe it's actually your duty as a Canadian taxpayer to avoid tax. Not evade. Evasion's very different. That's illegal.
Yeah.
To avoid tax.
Right. Legally.
Tax avoidance is perfectly legal. It's in fact, it's encouraged. Theoretically, it's encouraged because, tax benefits are out there so that basically we can guide spending and activity into areas of the economy that need some, let's say, some stimulation and so forth, or continued support and on and on. So, tax avoidance is critical. No one's going to know better than an accountant, where you can best avoid tax.
Yeah.
And, to give you an example, in 2022, I think there were 9 major changes to the CRA approach to taxation versus 2021.
Wow. I didn't even know that.
I can get into a couple of those in a moment, but there were nine major changes. So
it's awesome.
So that's important too.
Well, one thing, Sean, I think a lot of people hate about not only accounting, just in approaching professionals in general, is a lot of them do ask you, like, you're an accountant, or sorry, I'm an accountant, and you're a potential client. You come up to me and then I ask you, okay, well, Sean, what do you want to do? Yeah. Well, from your perspective as the client, you don't even know what you want to do. You're not the professional, right? So, the point I'm trying to get across...
no, I do know what I want to do.
You want to save money.
I want to pay as little in
taxes as
possible.
Okay, that is for sure, 100%. But in using what strategies, using what different vehicles? That's what you don't know, right? But a lot of accountants do ask that. Like,
I do know. I'm tax conversant, but if I was normal,
the average Joe, But like, I've had friends that ask me, well, what do I tell my accountant? It's like, well, he or she should be able to guide the conversation. You know what I mean? Ask you about your financial situation, your income, blah, blah, blah. And then, as you said previously, what do you, in terms of like, where do you see yourself 5, 10, 15 years down the road? Right. And then they can use their accounting strategies to make sure that those goals get reached or whatnot. Now, whether it's for personal or business, the point is you want an accountant that's communicative, right? That can take the reins, right? If I'm a patient at an optometrist's office, I'm relying on him or her to guide me in terms of what to do for my medical condition.
So when you say communicative, how is that important to the end client in terms of how they communicate? Like, for instance, you're going to have different styles. Some accountants are going to be a little more, let's say, I hate to use this term, but wooden in terms of how they describe an accounting path or whatever. Yeah. Some are going to be a little more flat, let's say more broad in their language. Some may be more jargon heavy than others.
I'll give you an example. Yeah. So one thing I like to do is, if I was an accountant and a potential client comes up to me and I understood a situation, I tell him her, can I give me 2 days and let me see what I can do for you? Let me see what I can come up for you. Mm-hmm. I will actually go in and explain. Now, I'm not an accountant, but this is the way I've dealt in my previous business. Right. I will actually explain step by step what I plan to do and what I can do for them and what value I can add. Now, yes, a lot of people will say, well, can't they just take that from you and go to another account and be like, hey, I want you to do 1, 2, 3, 4. Yeah. That's fine, but I don't care. I'm going to show the potential client that I know what I'm talking about. I've thought this through. It took me 2-3 days to come up with a strategy and to come up with a plan as to how we're going to, as you said, legally avoid paying taxes. Right. The other thing is, we live in a different time. I want to be able to call my accountant at 8, 9, 10 p.m. and I want him or her to answer. Okay. You know what I mean? I may be busy during the day, and it's just the nature of life that people are, free around different times. And me as an accountant, I should have the capacity and I should be able to answer the phone for my client no matter what time of day it is. I'm not saying 2 a.m. But yes, even if it's at 9, 10 o'clock at night, if I'm the accountant, I know I'm not sleeping. If my client wants to talk to me and reach me, even if it's not an emergency, he or she just had a quick question. Yep. Why not? Why do I have to draw these like very stark boundaries that no, I will not answer any email or answer any phone call after 6 p.m. Accessibility. Like, I, as an accountant or I as a professional, I need to be accessible to my clients.
Yeah, and if that's important to you, look for that characteristic or quality in the account, right? Yeah. And there's so many ways to use the term skin the cat in this type of situation. I mean, you might value accessibility more so than someone else, but someone else may value experience more so than someone else. So in other words, someone with 45 years experience is going to be more valuable to one client versus someone who's maybe a little younger in the business but has all sorts of accessibility.
Yeah.
Might be more valuable and attractive for another client.
Yeah. Energetic. Just, that energy. Like we can all, when you're talking to somebody, you can feel their energy. You can feel like, are they hungry for that growth? Are they hungry to take your book on and make your situation, make your accountancy that much more better and that much more optimized, right?
And the golden chalice, if you look at kind of, where and when to integrate an accountant with your advisor network, so to speak, if you, assuming you have a lawyer, as part of your family advisory group, you have a financial planner, a wealth advisor and a portfolio manager as part of your advisory group, and an accountant, is when you have them all having a dialogue periodically throughout the year, specifically as it relates to you, so that we're all sharing ideas around how to most optimally structure your tax situation, so that over time, not only is your asset base growing in a predictable, meaningful way, but you're also not leaking tax unnecessarily, and you're also properly constructed from a legal standpoint as it relates to, you mentioned trusts earlier on, corporate structures and so forth.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like having your own executive team. You're the CEO.
Yep.
Your accountant will be the CFO. Your lawyer will be the, I don't know, whatever it is, probably COO. But you have that executive team where they're all in sync to make sure that you, as the owner of your life, are being optimized financially and and economically, and even at your own personal life.
And your wealth advisor and your portfolio manager is that growth engine. That's that area of your portfolio. See, because when you look at how accountants are trained,
and wealth advisors go like hand in hand, like they complement each other, right?
Well, they're two sides of the same. They're two sides of the same coin, right? Because like if you look at the way an accountant is trained, all right, they're trained heavily to look back on what has occurred.
That's a perfect
account for it.
I love that.
Right? Account for it.
Yeah.
And then present it.
Yeah.
Okay. Whether it's presenting to CRA or to you or whoever, you, the end client.
Yeah.
Versus someone who's trained in finance is trained to look forward.
I like that. I like that distinction a lot.
So you need two sides of that coin. Now, ideally, if you're working with people that are trained in both sides, that's great, because you can talk to two languages, so to speak.
Yeah.
But accountants are very well versed at saying, okay, what has happened here?
Yeah.
Let's articulate it in a financial language that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then the wealth advisor can look at all this and say, okay, this is how we can structure this so that we can get the best potential outcome on it.
Let me ask you a question here. Is this how, I've never dealt with one specifically, is this how family offices work? Like, is it that level of synchronization between the different individuals and stuff like that?
And that's what we're achieving in our client base as well. That's what we're looking to do.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So a couple things that, for instance, if you're not using an accountant, you might not be aware of. Like for instance, accountants really understand how to use the tax brackets in terms of the tax system. So, as we all know, we're in what is called a graduated tax system.
Yep.
The less you earn, the less percentage of your income you pay as tax. And the more you earn, the more as a percentage of your income you pay in tax. But what we may or may not realize is, for instance, CRA has moved at the federal level those tax brackets up by 2.4% to accommodate inflation in the system.
Yeah.
So where you might have been in a higher tax bracket in a prior year, you might find yourself in a lower tax bracket in a subsequent year.
Because of inflation.
Because of the movement in the tax brackets due to inflation. Or you may actually, there might be some new deductions you can look at that can actually get you under that line a lot easier than what it would have been in prior years. Yeah. And then another simple thing, I forgot about this, but last year the Ontario government, created a staycation credit where if you went on vacation on Ontario, you're able to basically claim $1,000 worth of vacation expenses against your Ontario taxes. If you're an individual, if you're a family, you get upwards of $2,000.
I didn't even know that. I got to talk to my accountant about that. Make sure he knows about that.
So if I didn't say this on the podcast and you're just doing your own taxes, you might no one would know, right?
If for those individuals, obviously, not to put any job down or whatnot, but if you have a 16-year-old brother, or when you were 16 years old working at McDonald's, or even 18 years old, whatever it is, if you're doing it at H&R Block, all the power to you. But as your life, I think the point of this podcast was, as your life gets more complex and sophisticated, you need a more complex and sophisticated accountant, to do all that stuff. Well, no shots at H&R Block. I would just obviously rather, use a boutique law firm, a boutique
in your situation.
Yeah, right? Precisely. Yeah.
Don't be knocking on the H&R Block.
I'm not knocking.
The other thing too, though, and one of our clients famously says all the time, the tax man cometh.
Yes.
anytime you file a tax return with CRA, depending on the nature of your work and so forth, there is a possibility you could be audited.
Yeah.
And anyone who's ever been through an audit, I've been through a bench audit, just was randomly picked like 15 years ago.
Yeah. Not fun?
It's not fun.
How long did it take? How long was the whole audit for? Like how long was
Well, I did it by myself because I was stupid and didn't have an accountant. And it took me a year to fight the bloody thing.
It took you a year?
Yeah. Well, because you have to basically acquire like they audited me for 3 years of income between 2002 and 2005. I ended up owing $400 to CRA when the whole process was done. But it took me hours and hours to put everything together, fight it, and so forth. I'm telling you right now, I won't do it again. My accountant, Ben, shout out to you.
Yeah.
He's taking care of it when I get audited or if I get audited, because that whole process is stressful and you need to know what you're doing. There is a language the CRA speaks that you have to basically speak back to them when you're doing it. Accountants not only intimately know what you've submitted to CRA, and by rule, they're not going to let you trip over the wire. Like you're safe using an accountant.
Yep.
And secondly, they know how to basically rebuttal CRA.
Yeah,
and they could do it much more efficiently.
They probably even know how more case studies against a specific situation too, against a specific.
So
case.
those are the things that jump out at me. Is like time is money. If you're not good at something in general, don't do it.
Yeah,
let someone who's good at it do it. It's not as costly as people might think if you're not already using an accountant.
Yeah, it's actually really not that costly.
No, and it's a tax deduction too.
Yeah.
Like whatever you spend on an account, you write off against the
same
next
income.
year's subsequent year's taxes.
Yeah.
Making sure you're taking, looking at all the things you should be looking at. I mean, if you're 65 years or older, I mean, there's expenses potentially, again, depending on the circumstances, where if you renovate your house in a certain way, that can become tax deductible and so forth, right? In terms of accessibility and so forth.
Right.
These are things accountants just are innately aware of that we would normally not think of if we're just filing taxes on our own.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. One last thing I think that would be important to me, at least, is technologically proficient. I would require, personally speaking, on a personal level, and this is what the whole point of this episode was, like what to look for in an accountant, is I do require an accountant that that knows how to use video conferencing, that I don't have to actually physically show up. I'd love to obviously go out and sit with my accountant, but who has some level of, I would say, technical proficiency. Like, for example, can he sit, instead of me coming in and signing up some documents or me having to wait for some mailed documents in, does he know how to set up a DocuSign envelope or a DocuSign package, right?
Do you, Jalal?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
But things like that, these things to me at least are important because, for me at least, what technological proficiency can somewhat point to.
So if you're interviewing an accountant, and I happen to know who this accountant might be, I better send them a warning saying, "Don't pull out the slide ruler if you're talking to Jalal."
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Okay. Right.
Oh, the stuff you say, Sean, make me laugh.
just keeping it real, man.
I just love it. But those are my last things. That and relevance to me, right? Yeah. Like, I'll give you one last example I want to give to people. So, for example, I have this one accountant. He's not my accountant, but he's a friend of mine. He will only deal with OMVIC licensed clients. So, like, he specializes with people who are licensed to buy and sell cars. Yeah. Right? There's a whole, field for that type of accountancy and what you can do and what you can write off and whatnot and everything like that. And so there are accountants that actually specialize in that, or there are accountants that will specialize with for dentists, for instance, because I learned this just last year, is that dentists actually, when they work at a clinic, they don't work as an employee, they work as a contractor, right? So I didn't even know that. So there are
same with doctors too. Yeah. General practitioners and stuff.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Well, there you go. So like when general practitioners at a clinic, there you go. So finding an accountant that has worked with these professionals and knows the ins and the outs and knows what they're being asked of and knows what are the rights and what are the responsibilities makes your life 1,000 times easier.
So, all right. So basically, if anyone's out there listening to this podcast and, let's say you hear this and you say, you know what, I don't have an accountant, I'd really like to work with one or anything of that nature, or maybe my children ought to be working with an accountant, reach out to us. You know where to find us on LinkedIn. Obviously our emails are on LinkedIn and so forth. We can help you find an account. We have a referral network, so we can, like as Joel's saying, we can find a selection of 2 or 3 people that you could talk to that would be within the sphere of what you're looking for.
Yeah, you got it.
I think secondly, our next podcast that we're going to record in the next few days, we're into March, and I think we're going to talk about why March is the greatest month of the year.
There you go, the March Madness.
Awesome.
Take care, everyone.
Take care, everybody. Thanks for listening.